Our guest speaker today is Tom Grantham. I don't know Tom personally, but on here, Steve gave me a little bio on him, and it says he grew up in Jackson, came back to the Cape area after being 35 years at the Auto Parts, which according to your ad that you're running, that's just a rookie. But he's retired, so evidently he moved up quickly. And I asked him where he was in the meantime, in between, you know, those 35 years. And he said that he was in the upper Midwest. And Steve mentioned that he'd been through North Dakota. And Tom said that he traveled North Dakota, and it's a lonely, desolate place. But I didn't bother to tell him that I grew up in North Dakota. And if you think that it's lonely, desolate in 1986, you should have been there before 1948, when we didn't have electricity. If you had to go to the bathroom at night, with the wind blowing 40 miles an hour, you would know what desolate meant. But Tom's not here to talk about North Dakota or auto parts. He's here to talk about the Glenn House. So, Tom, please give Tom Grantham a warm welcome. He's going to talk to us about the latest at the Glenn House.
I'm very talented at putting my foot in my mouth. I have a BS degree, and I guess it just comes with that. I want to tell you, in 1986 through 1995, when I was there, it was still desolate and cold. And one of the popular activities, if you were traveling east or west on Interstate 90 or 94, I guess it was 94 that went through there, popular activity was people were reading the Wall Street Journal on the interstate because there weren't enough cars to worry about, so you just kind of prop the steering wheel with your knees, set the cruise on about 85, and you could read the paper between Fargo and Bismarck as you traveled west. So anyhow, but we had great customers, great people up there. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about the Glenn House. I don't have a formal education in history or historic preservation. I just kind of have a passion for our history, and when we moved back to Cape, my wife was drawn in by her uncle, Leland Shivelvine, who had been very involved in the Glenn House for many years. And of course, you know, once your spouse gets involved in something, you tend to get a little involved as well, and I did. But I've always had an interest in history, and the Glenn House has become our passion, and a passion of trying to preserve and have our mission being not only preserving but sharing that time period, that historical heritage of our community, and to make it come alive, if you will, so that people of all ages can experience it and learn from it and have a better feel for, you know, how the people that came before us, how they lived and how they worked, and their life experiences, and how they built our community. If you think in the late 1890s and the very early 1900s, Cape doubled in population in a very short period, in a 10 or 15 year span, and that was kind of the height of David Glenn and his involvement in the community. So, you know, it is an exciting time to talk about the things that he did. Our story is about the house, a Queen Anne Victorian style home of an upper middle class successful self-made man, but it's also about the people, the children that grew up there, the servants, the staff that worked there, the social, the mores of the period, if you will, and how they related to each other. And so we kind of make that our story and bring the house alive so people can see that experience and have appreciation for those that came before and built this great city and this community. So, but what I'd like to do, what we started doing is trying to take people back in time, and I don't know how clearly you can see that. The quality of the pictures is not real sharp, but I've got some pictures that I acquired from Cape Girardeau in that time period, and it maybe gives you an understanding when we get to the Glenn House, kind of how it existed and how it fit into what was really going on in our community in that time frame. So as long as I don't mess this up.
Other one. There you go.
And the first picture is actually a steamboat, a contemporary of that period, if you will, but it happens to be the steamboat Cape Girardeau. There was, in fact, 3 steamboats named Cape Girardeau. They didn't have long lives in those days. They either sank, hit snags, caught on fire, boilers blew up, all those sorts of things. But this was number 2, and it is very representative of the, you know, we were a transportation hub. Cape Girardeau was a city hub, and so it was the link to the outside. The levee was a busy place, and here you see a typical example of what was going on the levee. There's 3 steamboats tied up, and all kinds of freight and people and coming off and on the boats. You can't see it very well, especially from back there, but there's a newfangled automobile being offloaded one of the steamboats. So the new style of transportation coming to Cape on the old style, if you will. They call it Water Street for a reason. There's a typical view from one of the steamboats, and a springtime scene, downtown Cape Girardeau in that era, generally was water. And yet they worked through that, and they worked around it, or above it, or whatever. Finally, another form of transportation came to Cape Girardeau, and here we have the railroad, and that actually is the first train station, which was kind of between Themis and Broadway on Water Street, but on the levee side, if you will, of Water Street, and that's the first station, and the tracks actually split it for north and south traffic. There's the second train station. This one was located in what's now the parking lot across from Hudson's downtown. And you can see water still, a lot of water pictures. And they've sandbagged around the building so that the passengers can get to the train and get off the train, and freight, etc. can come. They didn't let the water stop them. They kept on going as long as it didn't get too deep, and the trains could still get through. You see the advent here, there's electric poles, so the electricity has been introduced. And this was something, I just found this interesting, that this is actually a scene where they would drive turkeys, and I say drive, I don't mean in a vehicle, I mean they would herd them down Broadway and get them to the levee and somehow get them on the boat, and they'd be shipped to St. Louis to be processed for fresh turkey. But it's just fascinating that they could, and you know, there's a little notation somewhere, and it says 761 turkeys. I don't know if that meant they had 761 turkeys or whatever, but you can see there's quite a few of them. Kind of a typical scene on the levee, on Water Street, with all the crates and everything stacked up and the wagons lined up to be either bringing it in to be shipped out or picking it up to take it out. Things that happen, you know, if you take that 1880 to 1910 or 1915 period, it's an amazing amount of things change. We talk about change today, but if you think what happened in that time frame, when the Glenn House was built, there was no city water. It was either a cistern or a well. There was no electricity, so it was oil lanterns. The house was heated with fireplaces and freestanding stoves. There was no telephone. The carriage was pulled by a horse. You know, there wasn't anything flying in the air except birds. And within about 15 or 20 years, all of those things changed. All of a sudden, you know, by the late 1890s, the city had city water, and electricity, and there was telephones, and central heat became not an extreme luxury, but you know, more of a standard thing. And so an awful lot of things changed in a big hurry. And think of what that did to their life. And those were dramatic changes that took place. You know, adding the vehicle and as well as obviously rail had been around for a while, but those things really had a huge impact on what was going on in the communities across the world. There's the term Teamsters. I mean, it means something different today, but back then it was a Teamster where you were driving a team of horses and you were pulling the freight. So this is a picture of, this is from Cape Girardeau where freight was coming in or either going out, I'm not sure which. There was other things transported that way. This is the modern convenience called an ambulance. So that's how you went to the hospital. That was Cape Girardeau. That's a Cape Girardeau ambulance. Toll roads are not new. This is a toll road, one of the toll roads that came into Cape Girardeau, and there's the toll booth and the gate and the bar. So probably an individual lived there and was either in charge of or owned that section of the road, and so you paid the tariff to use the roads, the improved roads. Notice how improved it is. It's been a college town for many, many years. This is St. Vincent's College, you know, the seminary. Those buildings, I believe, are still there. The view's being modified as we speak today, so mid-1800s, you know, it was a college town. I believe this is the previous academic hall. Not a real quality picture. For some reason, there's somebody standing in one of the windows and two guys standing on the roof. I don't know if they were making repairs that eventually caught the building on fire and it burnt down and was soon replaced. By this modern structure, there's an early view of Academic Hall. Pretty recognizable, and it's just been refurbished as well. Main Street. Commerce on Main Street. You see, I can see when you get close, but they've started to try to pave the streets. The paving of the streets kind of started in the late 1908, 1909, 10. If you read 100 years ago, you know, you've probably seen that the last couple of years. Initially, they used a variety of things. They started with wooden blocks. The wooden blocks lasted for a few years. They pulled those up and eventually went to brick pavers or cobblestones, and it was that for a while, and then obviously other versions. So they're starting to, but it's still essentially, it's not totally unimproved, it's somewhat improved. You can see in the corner it says Bank of Sturtevant. Bank of Sturtevant was the first bank in Cape and was the only bank until 1891 when David Glenn and some investors put together a program, and they established the First National Bank of Cape Girardeau, which opened in August of 1891. And David Glenn served as president until 1914. Another view of Main Street, a little more developed, but you can still see the transportation is buggies, horse and carriage. You can see the trolley tracks down the middle. The trolleys were pulled by horses. So some of the buildings that are there are still there, but a little bit more modern. You can see the changes starting to place. There's still the trolley tracks in the middle, but now you still have horse-drawn carriages, but on one side of the street there's a new modern car. And there's electric poles and telephone poles starting to appear. Oh, I should have gone back to that one in the corner. Well, you wouldn't be able to read it, I'll tell you about it. And there was a sign in the very extreme corner sitting on the sidewalk in front of one of the shops, and it says, ladies, men and women's shine, 5 cents. So you get your shoes shine for 5 cents. This is a little bit later in time frame, but we're up on the hill now on Broadway looking west, and there's the H&H building. And what I believe was the post office building, which was eventually replaced by the federal building, which is now replaced as just an opportunity for somebody, I guess. You can see the trolley cars, in fact, pretty wide up there. They're actually passing each other, so there was a way for the trolley cars to pass each other. So starting to throw in the Idaho Hotel also. Now here, I think this one's taken from the church steeple on Broadway, and it's looking north on North Main, and that was a very busy industrial area of the community at that point in time. The shoe factory has come, and we talk about the shoe factory because David Glenn was on the commercial club, which was one of the people that went and made the presentations, convinced them to build the shoe factory here in Cape Girardeau in the early 1900s. There's mills, there's all kinds of, the ice plant was there then, there's a lot of industry on North Main. The view's quite a bit different today with the aisle setting up there. Another view of Water Street and the businesses. I believe this is the building that's Port Cape, not sure, don't hold me to that, but I've got several experts in the room that I should have acknowledged that are probably much more knowledgeable than I am that could be given this presentation. Bill Porter and Tim back there. So anyhow, but I like this shot because it shows something that I hadn't thought about. Those are bales of cotton, and at the peak there were thousands of bales of cotton that were shipped through Cape Girardeau, brought down to the riverfront and loaded on the steamboats and hauled out. So it's part of the industry that it wasn't so obvious to me. There's a little later shot. There's the Idaho Hotel, no longer there. The fancy automobiles. Being a transportation center, obviously there had to be lodging for people coming and going and all this movement of goods and services and people. Well, and there was a lot of hotels. And this is the old St. Charles, which was down on Themis. And then here's a view from the river, and there's the Terminal Hotel. And And then the white building, I think, was a hotel. Bill, do you know for sure, was that a hotel?
But I don't.
And I can't recall the name of it either, but a couple of large hotels down on the river, and then St. Charles was just a block to the west, if you will, in Themis. And I believe that is Themis. And actually in the corner, you can see the old train station sitting there right across from the white building with the government. This was just a prominent residence. I don't know whose it is. I like the car. You know, it's a cool car. I wish I knew what kind of car it was or what the era was, but you can tell it was one of the early horseless carriages, and parked on one of the improved streets. So I thought that shot was worth just getting the car in there. Now I've moved out to the suburbs. I'm on Ellis Street. So we're up on the hill, you know, we're out into the suburbs of that era, if you will. And you see there's sidewalks. Now they may be paved, they may be wood, I'm not sure. They're on both sides of the street. There's a little girl walking on this side. On the other side is, either a mother or maybe a nanny or something with another small child, looks like a buggy. You can see that the trees are relatively young. The street made some improvement, but when you look close, it appears to be maybe gravel. But the curbs are just overgrown with grass and weeds and stuff. But the suburbs of Cape Girardeau, or era 1900 or
That's
1880.
from Broadway looking up, isn't it?
I think that's it's either looking north or south on Ellis. Ellis runs north-south. But there's a house at the end of it.
And that's sitting there in Methodist Church on the right, and
Could be.
the Oliver home at the end of the street.
Could be. That might be exactly right. The right view, right? And the quality of the pictures, even when you see it close. But I'll share these later if anyone wants to look more at it. The first St. Francis hospital, that was located at Sprague and William, that had moved, right across from St. Mary's. Common Pleas, which had been around for 50 or 60 years by this point. Very impressive place. The clubhouse at the Fairgrounds Park, which became Kappa Hall, was the site of dances and public gatherings and all kinds of events. Eventually the fairgrounds moved to, Arena Park, and this set, I think, about where the swimming pool used to be, kind of in that area in the park. And they had places of refreshment in those days as well. It says the Barrel House, Columbia Beer from St. Louis, Missouri. And I like the gathering of people. It's quite a mix of society, but everybody's dressed pretty well. Obviously a bartender and maybe an owner of the bar and some clients, but right dead center is a police officer in full uniform. So I don't know if he's rousting them out, or shoving them back in, or he's just heading up the party. I don't know which, but so they're quite a cross section. And I guess if you read the 100 years or so ago, there was a lot of efforts being put forth to clean up Cape Girardeau in those days. But, one of the places of refreshment. Music was a big part of the community. Schuchert Band on the bandwagon, I guess we use that term a little differently today, but fancy bandwagon, and the horse is covered with a blanket of some sort. They're either off in a parade or going somewhere to perform. I think there's a mural on Broadway now, talks about the band, but there's kind of a glimpse of entertainment in that era. My wife made me put this picture in. This is a picture of the early Cape Muni Band. The director in white happens to be William Shivelbein, her grandfather, and of course music and Shivelbeins is kind of a common thing in our community, and so that's the grandfather of the boys that operate the store today.
Is Dan Cotner in that picture?
Well, find the trombone. I'm sure that's him back there. Yep, absolutely. And Dan, a loyal supporter of the Glenn House, he was climbing ladders when he shouldn't, and I couldn't catch him to get him off the ladders, and finally he had surgery on his feet, but he and Polly, what a dedicated volunteer. Yeah, you're probably right, he's probably going back to David Glenn. David Glenn came to Cape Girardeau supposedly with $20 in his pocket. and worked in the mercantile business for a while, started his own mercantile, which was kind of general goods, you know, sold a little bit of everything. Built this building, it's got his name on it, but his business grew, and he took over the building adjacent, and in fact, at one point, he had, the address was 25, 27, 29, and 31 North Main, had about 18,000 square feet. In his store was the largest mercantile store in southeast Missouri, wholesaled to the region, and wholesaled in town and retail in town. Was successful enough that he parlayed that and invested in, and was the, you know, one of the founding members of First National Bank of Cape Girardeau in 1891. So very involved in community, served in community ways. But this is the building is still there. David Glenn has been taken off of the top, but you can recognize, I think, one of the antique shops is in that location now. This picture, I apologize. First of all, it's reversed, and I wasn't smart enough to figure out how to reverse it. So the perspective is off. You're actually looking south, but this stone building is the second building that housed First National Bank of Cape Girardeau, built in about 1904. A very impressive stone structure, decorative stone treatment all around, and that was the home and offices up above. And I mean, the home of the bank with offices and everything up above. Pictures reversed, so it's like one of the mills down at the end. It'd be looking south, but it actually set right beside the McGinney's jewelry store. Was torn down in the 80s when they built the new one at the corner of Broadway and Main, which is now also gone. And it was, I guess, Brown Shoe was in the location where that sat, but not in that building. That building was a beautiful, deep old building. The people that were involved, the story is always more than about things. You know, things are, you know, are easy, and we have a very fine collection that was put together by the people that restored the house. The Erlbacher family gifted the house to the Historical Association, and then were involved, and Mrs. Erlbacher was very involved and on the first board as they went forward, and all of the people that were involved in restoring the house were told by people that visit today, professionals as well as just experienced travelers, that the collection and the work and the things and the details and the things that are in the house are pretty special and pretty unique. When you go in Victorian homes, you actually see a lot of things here that you don't see in many of the others. So the quality of what was there and the quality of what was done to bring it back to life. But the man that started it was Edwin Dean. He was a prominent builder and an architect in Cape Girardeau in the mid-50s to the late, mid-1800s to the late 1800s. And his daughter, Lula, married David Glenn. And then Edwin Dean gave his daughter the house at 325 South Spanish that became the Glenn House. It was a wedding gift, and they were actually married in 81. The house wasn't finished till 83, and they moved in. At that point, it became the Glenn House. They raised 3 children there, and were there until 1914 when they sold it. And Mr. David Glenn. So, self-made man, got involved in the community, was successful in business. So we preserve kind of what he did and his work ethic and that sort of thing, and the things of that period. So an opportunity to see and learn about and experience the Queen Anne Victorian style, both in the house and in the furnishings, but also a way to step back in time, if you will, and experience and learn about and maybe have an appreciation for the things that they did that came before us. Some modern pictures. The only difference in how the house looks, I have a poor quality photo of the house from 1906, and the house had red bricks. But other than that, it's restored exactly as it is, and I think the paint was probably put on as a way to preserve maybe an aesthetic look, but I think also a way to preserve the bricks. The older bricks aren't as durable as bricks today, but it looks the same. Just a few quick interior shots and exterior shots. The house is like 98% original when it comes to glass and the doors and the floor and the hardware, you know, and the lights. Not light fixtures, but light switches and things like that. It is amazingly complete that over the years we haven't lost the glass, the beautiful stained glass and the etched glass and things like that. I know a lot of you have been there because a couple of years ago you had an event down there, and so I'll just flip through these. This is in the carriage house, and this represents another thing that we're trying to do when we say we want to bring the house alive. We do special events, but we also make it available for special events. So obviously, you folks had a meeting there a couple of years ago where we've had anniversaries and all kinds of celebrations, baby showers, and business meetings and luncheons. In fact, you know, the history department, I guess, is having a luncheon as we speak down there. Otherwise, my wife would have been with me. And but they wanted to use it for a luncheon event, and they are. So we make it available. The house and the ground are available for use and make for a very unique setting. The house itself, the main house, is available on a limited basis because of the value of the antiques and the things that we can and can't do, that there's some available. And we actually have done a series of Victorian dinners this spring that went over very well, and we actually used authentic recipes from 1890s and had it catered and had people step back in time, if you will, and actually use the inside of the house. We live by volunteers, and here's one of our volunteers, and I'll talk about our capital campaign in just a minute, but we created kind of a heritage walkway under our grape arbor, and I'll give him credit, Willard Edwards. I talked him into it, and I carried it. I was his step and fetch it. He figured out how to lay these bricks, and these are, if you contribute to the capital campaign, you can get an engraved brick at certain levels, and we were laying the bricks and starting that process. He was laying the bricks. And there's kind of a finished view of the bricks that are in place, and there's lots of bricks available. Back to the beginning. I don't know if my lovely assistants passed out my brochures or not, but I have brochures for everybody, and it's got some detail, and we have a website. But the Glenn House, in our opinion, is a valuable heritage asset to the community. It's also an asset from the standpoint, we have about 2,000 visitors a year and have had for the past several years. About 2/3 of those come from outside of Cape Girardeau. There are a lot of people that come in not only to see the Glenn House, but to do other things in our community. You know, we're part of that draw. Obviously, it's influenced the last couple of years by the riverboats, which, you know, they're all from out of town. So we are part of that destination part, but really the heritage, the ability to bring school children in the spring. We have a lot of classes that come through, probably, I think last year 400 or 500 school children came through and toured, working towards Missouri history standards, as well as kids of all ages, if you will, coming to see whatever was most interest to the house. So we are an important asset. We're a tool that allows people to go back and experience and learn about that period in our time. And the things that we're trying to do to support it are obviously membership, tours, special events. We have our events listed on the website. We're looking for sponsors. We're looking for volunteers. We have a capital campaign going that one of those brochures is included. The house is 130 years old this year, and we looked at maintenance and restoration needs and established that we could use a minimum of $130,000 to keep the house current, fresh, pristine, if you will. And there's different ways that you can get involved. That brochure is included. We have raised about $30,000, and we have spent that on the front porch. The front porch was just completely restored, from roof to railings to floor to columns, and saving all the original material that we could. So we're in the middle of that. We have a lot of things going on from special events. This fall we have a quilt show. We have a Whiskey of the World tasting event. We have a pumpkin patch event. And we of course have our holiday shows all through the month of December on the weekends. So a lot of things going on. But I've been doing all the talking, so I'll just stop at this point and say I appreciate the opportunity to share the Glenn House and see if there's any questions, comments. Yes?
When's the whiskey tasting event?
The whiskey tasting event, I believe, and it won't be advertised. We sold out last year when we did that.
So you won't really get
I
to know.
think,
Yeah.
Tim, you remember off the top of your head? October?
Not right off the top of my head, but you can go to Facebook. We have all the events listed on there.
And you can go to our website,
yeah, that too.
glenhouse.org. It's the 10th.
Yep.
If you want your name on the list, see me afterwards and I'll get your name on the list, because there's only 45 seats available and we sold out last
Yeah,
year.
they go fast.
It'll be about, I think it's going to be $40 this year, and it'll include hors d'oeuvres.
How many-
Vino is
How many flights of that was? can't remember how many flights there were. Kind
8.
of lost count.
8. We had 8 last year.
Yeah. That was good.
Any other questions?
All right, I have a question. You mentioned that the Glens sold the house in 1914. Who bought it?
Well, the story, and I'm glad you asked that question. It's a story to itself. Every room has a different story. Well, Mr. Glenn was the president of the bank. The bank got in trouble in 1913 and ended up being closed for a weekend and was restructured and found that they had made some really bad loans. And so the primary investors, Mr. Glenn being one of those, personally covered the bad loans. And because of that, he had to sell the house. And he sold the house to, I think it was a Rozier who had done it, but he told it the next day, and it was sold to the Hunter family, and they owned it until 1953. The Hunter family would be the Hunters were the family connected to our Lieutenant Governor, Peter Kinder. So that was the connection. They were there many years and it turned over several times. So he was standing good. I guess today, I think, they'd let the corporate fail, and if customers suffered, so be it. But in those days, he and the primary investor stood up and covered it personally, and he lost the house, which really upset his wife because it had been gifted from her father. And they moved over on Independence Street for a few more years. And then in 1922, he was still running a mercantile business, had a fire. This time he was elder, and at that time he cashed it in, and he moved to Dallas where his son had resettled. But when he died in the 30s, they actually brought him back. He is buried in Colorado in Longmont. Yes?
The pictures that you show now, or if you go down there, the trees around the house are really mature. What
Yes.
was it like in the beginning? Was it an open space, view of the river, or were the trees just...
Much more open than it is today, especially across the street, the trees that line, I think, the east side of Spanish. But the old picture has mature trees in the front yard. I have, like I said, a picture from 1906, and there are a couple of mature trees, so it had a similar look. They were spaced a little different. We think the one maple, the red maple that's in the southeast corner of the Glenn House yard is probably at least 100 years old and could have been there, in his time. But yeah, so it did change. But they like trees. You saw on Ellis Street, they were planting trees, because they weren't very full grown, but a lot of them had been cut down. It's much more open. There was one shot at the second train station looking south, and you can kind of see where that rises on a hill, and there was a girls' finishing school up there, and there was literally no trees there. And that would be where that 4-unit condo is on Spanish. I can't remember the name of it, but it's a different look.
The view from the front porch before the Knights of Columbus built their building, you can look out on the river. That's just a great photo.
And I think at one point there was a house across the street, but I don't know when that disappeared. You look at some of the old works.
Was the house ever vacant for any extended
Yes.
period of time?
It went through a couple of different ownerships, and then it got into the 60s. It was a boarding house for a while, and then it actually sat empty for a couple of years, at which point Robert Erlbacher, Missouri Dry Docks, bought the house. I've been told, probably correct me if I'm wrong, is that he had intended to kind of convert it to an office space. I think that they decided maybe that didn't really make sense. They didn't go forward on that. He died suddenly, but his wife wanted to pursue the preservation of the house, the restoration of the house, and they gifted it. Actually, were instrumental in starting the history. Our official name is the Historical Association of Greater Cape Girardeau, Inc., a 501c3, and we do business as the Glenn House. But so, yes, there was that period in the 60s where it stood empty for a couple of years. It was in really bad shape. Be careful of what people gift you. But they did a beautiful job of the restoration through the 70s. The Heritage Balls were the primary vehicle to raise the money, a lot of money to restore it and to furnish it, which was really done extremely well. I have no connection or can take no credit for that, but everybody, the professionals, tell us that it's amazing how they did it and what they did to collect and to restore the house.
Other questions?
Overstayed my time frame. I appreciate the time, appreciate the time. Come see us. Check us out, glennhouse.org.